heeded by citizens that you care about, that the chairman from Idaho cares about, and that I certainly care about. I heard directly from Allison Mendel in Vermont. She has a 17-year-old son. He spent 174 days in a hospital fighting myeloid leukemia. He's cancer-free. That's really the good news, and it's a reflection of the extraordinary care that he got at a local community hospital where there was a quick diagnosis, and at the University of Vermont Medical Center where he got expert care. But that family, who was the beneficiary of having access to affordable health care, their premium is going to go up by $40,000. $40,000 is what they're going to have to pay, and they don't have that money. And they know how absolutely critical it is that they have insurance, because their beloved son is alive and healthy today because they did have access to health care. As you know, open enrollment began on November 1st. And what is going to happen is that as folks see this notice of the sky-high premiums, they're going to opt out of insurance altogether. And they're not going to opt out because they don't want to pay it. They're going to opt out because they can't pay it. And I'm having in mind a woman who, she and her husband have 2 kids. They have a small business where they make meals in their takeout. And she said, you know, as a mother, I feel totally irresponsible if I don't have health care for my kids. But if I can't pay it, what do I do? You know, and the point here, I see the chairman of the Finance Committee. It's so good to see you, Senator. You care, I care about folks who need the health care that they have now. I think we all share that. But they won't have it unless we do something to extend these tax credits. You know, this is not a red state, blue state deal. It's not a Republican or Democratic deal. We got some examples in other states. A farmer and his family of 4 in Tennessee making $120,000 a year. By the way, that probably includes some off-farm income with one of the couple working off the farm, as is so often the case. Those premiums will go up $1,900 a month. That's $33,000 a year. How does a family with an income of $120,000 add $33,000 in expenses? A small business owner in Baker, in Alabama, making $85,000 a year will see premiums increase by $750 a month. That's about $15,000. A mechanic, a single person in North Carolina who makes $65,000 who loses access to the tax credits, actually loses access to the tax credits entirely. And to afford any health care, they'll have to pay over $14,000 a year. You know, the majority leader is saying that we can get what we want, or we can get to an outcome if we just trust him and vote to negotiate later. And I want to say something directly to you and to all of my colleagues. I trust the majority leader. I trust John Thune. But here's a fact. It's beyond his control if we don't get an enforceable agreement, because we have to get buy-in from the House of Representatives. And to the everlasting disgrace of the House of Representatives, they are not here today, and they haven't been here for over 6 weeks. And many over there have made it very clear that they want nothing to do with extending the tax credits. So yes, I trust my Republican colleagues. I trust our Senate Majority Leader. But if we don't have a House that is even here, how are we going to get...
Would my colleague yield for a question?
What question?
I recognize the senator from Connecticut. Oregon. Oregon. What'd you do all in Connecticut? Oregon.
Okay. What my colleague seems to be stressing, and it's something I share, is that there is an urgency here.
Right.
In my state, we have a couple with premium hikes of 500%. They feel like they're getting hit by a healthcare wrecking ball. And what I'm also deeply concerned about, and we've talked about it in the Finance Committee, is that with all these cuts in public programs, we're going to have a massive shift to those who have employer-sponsored coverage. It's 154 million people. 92% of Americans with coverage that comes from their employers, they're going to have a massive shift onto them. And what I believe my friend is saying, and what he's stressing, and he's seeing it in Vermont, is the urgency of this. If you could speak to that as we review this first of what I think may be other colleagues coming to speak.
Right. No, thank you very much. You know, one of the questions is, why don't we just open up and deal with this later? And there is an answer to that. And this is not about one party trying to jam the other. It's about, as the ranking member of the Finance Committee said, a deadline. Folks have to make a decision about signing up during open enrollment that began on November 1st, and they're looking at these very much higher bills, and they have to figure out whether they can afford to pay them. And for many families, they won't be able to afford. The decision is made when they get a notice that the premium is going up $30,000. And that will have spill-on effects. First of all, it'll be incredibly insecure. It'll just be painful for these families that are thinking that they don't have health coverage for their family, and we all relate to that. But then they're going to get sick, and they're going to go to our community hospital, and they're going to get coverage, and the hospitals are going to try to figure out how to get paid. And the way they'll do that is by seeking rate increases and then having the cost shift further escalate the expense to our employers who really deeply care about providing coverage to the folks that work for them. And, you know, I know we're here, I know in Oregon, in Idaho, in Ohio, your employers care about their employees and they want them to have coverage, but if they can't afford it, you get back to the same old thing. You know what, I'll try to deal with the premium increase, the employer says, but we're not going to be able to give you that raise that you need to pay the utility bills. So, you know, my heartbreak on this is that I know we all care about the well-being of the families that we represent. And there is an urgency to the moment because the open enrollment now in November is here and families have to make decisions. And this body is literally the only institution in the United States of America that has the ability, that has the authority, that has the power to provide a remedy to the families we all care about. So that's my plea to my Republican colleagues. You know, President Trump, I don't want to, in this case, turn this into a political deal, but he's the president, and he's got enormous authority, and he's got enormous influence on the Republicans in the House and in the Senate. And it would be so good if he would come and sit down and figure out how to address this problem. And the simplest way to do it is to extend the tax credits. And then all of us acknowledge that we have to address the cost of health care. We have to. And I, as a person who is always focused on access, the biggest threat to continued access to care for folks in Vermont is the rising expense. At a certain point, you just can't afford it. So, you know, I know in talking to many of my Republican colleagues, you're focused on cost, totally fair. But the answer to dealing with the cost of health care is not to take away insurance. People still get sick. So we got an urgent moment here where people are just getting this horrible feeling when they open up that mail. And that family who's had health care in 2025, and oftentimes it'll be a couple and they're caring about their kids, they're caring about each other. They want that sense of confidence and purpose that comes from being a parent who loves their kids. It comes from being an employer who feels good that they're able to meet the health care insurance needs of their workers. They care about it. But they get a bill where they're going to perceive it as failing if they can't continue to provide that coverage in 2026 that folks had in 2025. Parents are going to feel that. We can change that. We can change that. And as somebody who is deeply concerned about extending those credits so people can have health care, I pledge to you, and I'm so glad we've got the chair and we've got the ranking member of the Finance Committee, and I can just say on my behalf that anything that's reasonable to do to deal with this cost that is so detrimental to the well-being of our country, the health care is just too expensive, I'll be there. But I do believe the one thing we cannot do in good conscience is allow these premium tax credits to expire when what that means is that the folks we care about who have no control themselves over what the cost of health care is, they're just on the receiving end, that we've got to extend those. And that can bring us time to start addressing some of the concerns that my colleagues have about the cost of health care. So, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on Finance be discharged from further consideration of S3102 and the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration, and that the Welch substitute amendment, which is at the desk, be considered and agreed to. The bill as amended be considered and read a third time and passed, and the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Mr. President, reserving the right to object.
Recognize the senator from Idaho.
Thank you, Mr. President. One thing needs to be made really clear. We have all this talk about how we have an urgent crisis, and it can be totally fixed if we just accept the demand of my colleagues on the other side that we extend the temporary COVID tax or health care premium enhancement that occurred during the COVID crisis. This is what needs to be made clear. Insurance premiums are skyrocketing, not because of a temporary small COVID premium support passed during the COVID crisis. They are cratering, they are skyrocketing because our healthcare system is broken and needs to be fixed. And we've been asking to negotiate about this for years and intensely over the last few months. And let me give it some real specifics. This demand that my colleagues on the Democrat side are making, even if it were true that it was all of it was an impact, letting it expire would be an impact on premium increases, which is not accurate. Even if all of it were to be impacting premium increases, it's only 4% of the premium support. It's only 4% of the premium increases that are coming. So we have the entire United States government shut down because we won't concede to a demand that we spend another $100 to $350 billion in premium supports because the premium expansions are coming, resulting from a broken healthcare system that we can get no engagement on in negotiating. Congress has a timely, bipartisan obligation to reopen the government. The proposal offered by my colleague on the other side of the aisle does not address that. The Senate has now voted 14 times to end this shutdown. My Democrat colleagues claim to be taking a stand to make health care more affordable. While we may disagree on the merits of those individual policies, everyone in this chamber shares that goal. In fact, as a part of the clean CR that we have voted on 14 times to extend critical Medicare and Medicaid programs, We would have increased payments to rural hospitals. We would have provided access to telehealth services for our seniors. We would have offered our seniors the option to receive hospital-level services in their homes. But no, not unless we agree to spend $350 billion or $100 billion. The current request is around $100 billion. Not unless we agree to spend billions of dollars extending what were made temporary by my Democrat colleagues when they controlled the Senate. They were made temporary because they were intended to get us through the economic difficulties of the COVID crisis. And again, they relate to only 4% of the premium increase that is coming. And yet it is said that we can solve the entire premium increase problem today by just doing this. Not true. Because Democrats will not join Republicans in reopening the government, these programs that I mentioned just a moment ago have lapsed. These programs have lapsed, disrupting care for millions of Americans. Premiums are going up dramatically for all Americans, and not just those enrolled in Obamacare. And despite the confusion that has been created here, the original Obamacare subsidies don't expire. Let's make that very clear. The only thing expiring is temporary COVID-related enhancements that the Democrats themselves made temporary. The Democrats are the ones who set the expiration date that we're debating today. Even without extending these COVID enhancements, taxpayers will spend $1 trillion over the next 10 years subsidizing Obamacare premiums. So let's not tell the American people that the American government is going to stop subsidizing the failed Obamacare premium system. Over $1 trillion is going to be spent subsidizing it. We need to address that problem. We cannot spend our way out of rising premiums. If my colleagues want to have a conversation about reforms that truly lower costs, instead of masking the problems with a $100 to $350 billion taxpayer-funded patch, then Republicans are willing to have that conversation. Leader Thune has made this point clear. In his own words, he said, "I am willing to sit down with the Democrats," and I join him. I'm also willing to sit down with the Democrats to discuss the growing unaffordability and unsustainability of Obamacare. It's a system they created, but I'm happy to hear them out. I'm still quoting Leader Thune. Heck, I'm even willing to give them a vote, which we have offered and offered and offered. But there's one condition: end the Schumer shutdown. I will not negotiate under hostage conditions, nor will I pay a ransom, period. That's the end of the quote from our leader, Leader Thune. For these reasons, I object to my colleague's request. Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President,
I recognize the senator from Vermont.
I want to address some of the points that the chair of the Finance Committee made. Now, first of all, I happen to be in agreement with you that we have a broken healthcare system. Number two, I am absolutely willing to engage with you and with anyone in this chamber to address the rising cost. And we have made some bipartisan progress. I support the international pricing mechanism that President Trump is talking about to try to bring down prescription drug cost. We had a PBM and physician payment bill that was in the legislation last year that got blown up when Elon Musk intervened. We should be doing what you're saying. And I can just speak for myself. When it comes to talking about how do we bring down the cost of healthcare, I think that's absolutely essential for the well-being of the economy and the well-being of the American people. Also, I want to acknowledge on COVID, it was temporary. You're right about that. And of course, that was because we had that emergency where healthcare demand went way up and employment went way down. So it's a fair point, and I owe you an answer on why it is I'm standing here today asking to extend something that was temporary. And here's the reason. We did fail to bring down the cost of healthcare. So what has happened since COVID left is there's been very significant inflation, including really high inflation in healthcare cost. And people in this country are not able to pay their bills. And it's really becoming a problem for the people you and I both represent. So the cost of healthcare has gone way up. And in fact, if we don't extend that premium support, even though yes, it is temporary, it will expire, it's going to mean that those premium increases I cited, where some folks who are going to be paying or need to pay $32,000 more have a real problem. They're not going to be able to do it. So you make a meritorious point, but the point I make is that those individuals and those families who are dealing with the reality that they're getting, say, a $32,000 increase, they have no capacity to do the things that only we have the capacity to do. They're on the receiving end. They have no control over it. So it's not like a family has been irresponsible last year, or they're smoking and getting sick. They're just going about their lives doing their work. And in the mail, they get a notice that they got to pay $32,000 more. So, the question for us is, do we want to give them at least a year where they have some stability, and then we take up the challenge? Because I think all of us here know the cost of healthcare is totally and completely unsustainable. It's brutal. But the reality is, however we got here, that families in every single state of this nation are going to be faced with premium increases they can't afford. So I just want to convey to you, Senator, my respect for your points. But that's my best response to them. At the end of the day, our failures can't be the casualties of our failures as an institution to deal with healthcare costs can't become the insurmountable burden for the families that we represent.
Would my colleague yield briefly?
Yes, yes.
I think the remarks my colleague has made are thoughtful. He knows since my days as director of the Gray Panthers, I've always wanted to work in a bipartisan fashion. But how do you do it if, in fact, in the Finance Committee, we have not had, by my calculus, a health care hearing in 400 days? Isn't that what my colleague is saying? Is that we ought to have these hearings? We ought to work in a bipartisan way? That's what we did in the PBM bill, where we got a 26-0 vote. I see my friend from California, the new member. You can't get a vote around here, 26-0 to order a can of Sprite. But it was because colleagues like Senator Welch wanted to find some common ground and get going. Isn't that what my colleague is saying, is that we want to work with Republicans in a bipartisan way, and we are available 24/7 to do it? Is that correct?
Well, it is. I want to be fair to my colleague, because I think he wants to work with us. We obviously have different points of view, but we've got to sit down, and we've got to stay at it, and we've got to have hearings, and we've got to do the work that we're blessed to be able to do. So I just...
Julie, yield briefly to me.
I will, yes.
Senator Welch, first of all, I appreciate you acknowledging that we do want to work together. I would hope that you would acknowledge that we are working together, trying to find solutions. And this notion that the fact that we haven't had a hearing is because we haven't gotten to the point in that where we have legislation before us to have that hearing on. But I just would like to make 2 points. One, once again, open the government. Number 2, even if we agreed to your request today, all of those people you talk about who are going to get hit with premium increases are going to get hit with premium increases because this temporary COVID premium enhancement support was never intended to be and never was the foundation of what is driving, or did deal with the foundation of what is driving premium increases. Everybody in America is going to get hit with a massive premium increase, and it's not going to be changed if we give an extension for that 4% that goes to this enhancement. It could be like made a tiny bit different in some ways and in some places. I doubt it would make a dollar's difference in most cases. Let's get the government open and let's continue real negotiations to solve this problem. We mutually have talked. We mutually know that there are things we can work on to get this solved. I'm just asking my colleagues on the other side to quit trying to blame Republicans for the premium increases that are coming and say, let's get the government open and let's get together working to solve our health care crisis.
I thank you. I thank my colleagues. I would love to get the government open, and I'd love to be able to let folks know that the health care they had in 2025, they'll be able to have in 2026. I'd like the president to do what presidents do, and that's get the parties together in a room and negotiate an outcome that works for all of us. Whatever we do in this is where I want to agree with both my chairman and ranking member. We have real work to do on the cost side of healthcare. We really all have to take that on. But the approach to dealing with the high cost of healthcare can't be taking people's healthcare away. It has to be making the healthcare they have more affordable. So I thank the gentleman. I thank my colleague, Senator Wyden, our ranking member, and I yield the floor.
President.
I recognize the senator from Virginia.
Mr. President, pursuant to Section 601B of the International Security Assistance and Arms Control Act, I move to discharge the Committee on Foreign Relations from the further consideration of Senate Joint Resolution 90